They just happen. One second you're standing in a doorway, holding a child's school backpack and a prescription bag from Walgreens. And the next second, you're staring at something that makes your entire 30 years of living feel like a rough draft someone else rewrote without asking. I'm Robert Garrett. Bobby, to people who've known me long enough to mean it, I'm 53 years old, retired Army, 8 years, HVAC technician for the last 19. I've crawled into attics in August in Tennessee when the outside temperature hit 104. I've driven service trucks at 2 in the morning during ice storms because someone's elderly mother had no heat. I've fixed things. That's what I've done my entire adult life. Fix things. Houses, machines, broken schedules, broken promises. I fixed them and I kept going. What I could not fix, what nobody teaches you to fix, is the afternoon you come home a week and a half after your divorce papers clear and find another man sitting at your kitchen table. Not just sitting in your chair. The specific one with the worn armrest from 19 years of you reading the paper there every Sunday morning. Sitting in your chair, in your kitchen, wearing your dog tags around his neck like a souvenir. And that's not even the part that broke me. The part that broke me was what he said when he finally looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. He smiled. Slowly. Like someone who'd already rehearsed this moment. And then Kyle Mercer said, real casual, in front of my 6-year-old daughter, "Oh, hey, man. Sandra said you might stop by. Didn't think you'd actually show." He paused, let it land, then added something quieter, something he made sure only I could hear. Kind of sad, honestly, showing up to a house that doesn't want you anymore. I stood there, holding Emma's inhaler in my left hand and her little pink backpack in my right, and I did not move. I did not speak. I just looked at the dog tags hanging against his chest, the ones I'd worn through 2 deployments, the ones Emma used to hold in her tiny fist when she couldn't sleep as a baby, and I thought something very quiet and very specific. I'm going to be patient, and patience is going to cost this man everything. But before I get to that, you need to understand how I got to that doorway in the first place. Sandra and I met in 1997 at a barbecue outside Fort Campbell, Kentucky. She was 22, I was 24. She was wearing a yellow dress and laughing at something her friend said, and when she laughed, she put her whole face into it, the way people do when they're not thinking about being watched. I was thinking about being watched the entire time I walked over to introduce myself, which probably explains why my opening line was, "You dropped your napkin." She hadn't dropped anything. She looked at me, looked at the ground, looked back at me, and said, "You're not very good at this, are you?" We got married 11 months later. I want to be honest about the 28 years that followed. Not the Facebook version, not the version you tell at somebody else's wedding. The real version. It was a good marriage for a long time. Genuinely good. We had Emma late, Sandra was 40, I was 47. We'd given up on it honestly, and that little girl arrived like a renegotiation of everything we thought we understood about being people. She was born with reactive airway disease, needed a nebulizer her first 2 winters, and for those first years, Sandra was ferocious in her love. Researching allergens, building routines, fighting with insurance companies on the phone in a voice I'd never heard from her before. She was extraordinary, those years. But somewhere around Emma's 3rd birthday, something shifted. I'm not sure I can locate it exactly. I just know that I started coming home to a wife who was somewhere else even when she was standing in the same room. I worked long hours. That part's true. HVAC in Nashville summers is not a part-time commitment. There were weeks I left before Emma woke up and got back after she was asleep. I missed Sandra's company birthday dinner because of an emergency commercial job. I missed Emma's first preschool spring program because 2 condensers failed simultaneously at a hospital across town, and hospitals don't negotiate. Sandra told me several times that she felt like a single parent who happened to have a roommate. I heard her. I just didn't understand that hearing isn't the same as changing. That's the thing about men who are good at fixing external things. We genuinely believe that working hard enough is a form of love. And sometimes it is. But sometimes the person in front of you just needs you to put the tools down and sit on the porch and do nothing beside them. And I was never very good at doing nothing. In March of last year, Sandra sat across from me at our kitchen table with a mug of coffee she didn't drink and said, "I think I've been unhappy for a long time, and I kept waiting for it to change on its own." I asked her what she needed. She said she didn't know anymore. 3 weeks later, she filed. The divorce took 9 months. It was civil, in the way that very cold things are civil. No yelling, no throwing things. Just 2 people carefully dividing a life into 2 separate lives, like sorting laundry in the dark. I moved into a rental house on Hillsborough Road. Single story, brown trim, smelled like someone else's cooking for the first 3 weeks. I set up Emma's room, first purple curtains, glow stars on the ceiling, the little white noise machine she needed for her breathing. I set up my own room last, and by that point I didn't have the energy to care that the mattress was secondhand and the closet door stuck. We agreed on joint custody. I had Emma every other week, plus certain holidays, plus the understanding that I could come by Sandra's place, still technically our house. I was still paying half the mortgage until the refinance cleared, if Emma needed anything medical. Her inhalers, her nebulizer supplies, things like that. What the agreement did not account for was Kyle Mercer. I found out about Kyle the same way you find out about most things you weren't supposed to know accidentally, and all at once. Emma, during one of our FaceTime calls, mentioned that Mama's new friend Kyle had taken her to get ice cream. She said it the way 6-year-olds say things matter-of-factly, with no idea that the sentence was a small grenade. I said, "That sounds fun, baby." Then I sat in my rental house for 20 minutes staring at a wall. I didn't say anything to Sandra that week. Not my business. She was allowed to have her life. I understood that. But then there was the Tuesday I came to drop off Emma's nebulizer supplies. The pharmacy had filled the prescription to my address, because that's the address the pediatrician had on file, and Emma needed the cartridges by morning, and I let myself in with the key I still had because the lock hadn't been changed yet. The kitchen smelled like someone had attempted to make jambalaya and partially succeeded. Country music, louder than Sandra ever played it, came from the living room. And Kyle Mercer was standing at my stove in a pair of sweatpants and a Nashville Predators jersey, stirring something with my good cast iron spoon, the one Sandra's mother gave us as a wedding present. He was 36 years old, slim, decent looking, the kind of tan you get from spending recreational time outside rather than working outside. He had one of those beards that's maintained to look like it isn't. And around his neck, and this is the part I keep coming back to, the part that still makes something tighten in my chest around his neck, were my dog tags. My dog tags. The ones from my second deployment, the ones Emma had asked to borrow 6 months ago to sleep with because she said they smelled like me and made her feel safe. Apparently, at some point, they had migrated from Emma's nightstand to Kyle Mercer's neck. He turned around when he heard me, looked me up and down once. Then, "Oh, hey, man. Sandra said you might stop by. Didn't think you'd actually show." That's the line. The one I told you at the start. Sandra came in from the hallway a moment later, wearing my old flannel shirt, a gray one I'd had since 2009, the one I wore every weekend in autumn, and when she saw me, her expression ran through 5 emotions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, guilt, defensiveness, composure, and then something that looked almost like irritation, like I was the one who had done something wrong by being there. "Bobby, I didn't know you were coming today. Emma needs her nebulizer cartridges by tomorrow morning. Pharmacy sent them to my address." "Oh." She glanced at Kyle. Kyle was not looking at either of us. He was looking at the stove with great focus, the way men look at things when they're pretending they're not listening. I set the pharmacy bag on the counter. I looked at my dog tags one more time. Then I looked at Sandra. "Can I get those back?" I said quietly. She blinked. "What?" "The dog tags. They belong in Emma's room." Kyle turned around then, and he smiled again, the same slow smile from before, and leaned against the counter with one elbow, and said quietly enough that it was still technically just to me, but loud enough that Sandra couldn't miss it. Kind of sad, honestly, showing up to a house that doesn't want you anymore. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I picked up the pharmacy bag, took out only what Emma needed for tonight, set the rest back on the counter, and walked to the front door. Sandra followed me into the hallway. She kept her voice low. "Bobby, don't make this a thing." I looked at her. "You're right," I said. "I won't." But inside, something had locked into place. Not anger, exactly. Something older than anger. Something that had been waiting quietly in the back of a very patient man for a very long time. I want to tell you about the nights, because nobody talks about the nights. The daytime after a divorce, you can manage. There's work, there's Emma's school schedule to coordinate, there's paperwork, there's the particular low-grade productivity of a man who has decided that forward motion is a substitute for feeling things. But the nights in that rental house on Hillsborough Road are a different matter entirely. I'd sit in the kitchen around 10:30 after Emma was asleep on her weeks with me, and I'd drink coffee I didn't need, and I'd listen to the house settle. Old rental houses settle a lot. Pipes knock. A floorboard somewhere toward the back pops twice around midnight, like clockwork. My first week there, I got up twice thinking someone was in the house. By the third week, I was sleeping through it. That's the thing about loneliness. You don't get used to it exactly, but your body stops performing the surprise of it. My buddy Marcus, we'd served together, second tour. He was now running a welding supply company out of Brentwood. Marcus took me out for dinner about 3 weeks after I moved in. Cracker Barrel, because that's where Tennessee men go to process emotion near Biscuits. He didn't ask me how I was doing right away. That was the thing about Marcus. He just talked about normal things, his kid's baseball game, a contract bid he just lost until I was relaxed enough to not be performing anything. Then he said, without looking up from his food, "You sleeping?" "Mostly." "You eating?" "Enough." He nodded, chewed something for a while. Then, "That guy she's seeing? Kyle. I've heard some things." I looked up. "Nothing specific," he said. "Just heard some things. From people in the music industry over in East Nashville. You know how that goes." I did know how that went. Kyle, apparently, had positioned himself on the outer edges of the Nashville music scene. Not a musician exactly, more what people in that world called a connector. Someone who knew producers, who brought people together, who was perpetually almost involved in something significant. The kind of person who always has a story about a deal that's about to close. "I'm not looking to dig up dirt," I said. Marcus shrugged. "I know, I'm just saying, sometimes you don't have to look. Sometimes things surface on their own when a man is patient." I thought about Emma's face when she FaceTimed me that week. The way she'd whispered something near the end of the call and then checked over her shoulder before saying it. She'd whispered, "Daddy, Kyle got really loud last night." I don't like loud. I kept my voice level. "Did anything happen, baby?" "No. He just talks really loud when he's upset. Mama says he's just passionate." Passionate. I sat in my rental kitchen that night with cold coffee, in the memory of carrying Emma home from Vanderbilt Children's Hospital on her third day alive, when her oxygen levels had dropped and every single thing in me had focused down to a single point, keep her breathing. And I thought about what it meant for a 6-year-old to start checking over her shoulder before telling her father something. That was the moment I stopped being a man processing a divorce and started being a man with a plan. I am not a scheming man by nature. The Army trains you to be methodical, not vindictive. There's a difference. Vindictive is burning something down. Methodical is understanding exactly what it is before you decide whether it needs to burn. I spent 2 weeks being methodical. Marcus was right that things surface when you're patient. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't break any laws. I just did what anyone with internet access and a few hours of patience can do. Kyle Mercer, age 36, had moved to Nashville from Memphis 3 years ago. Before that, Knoxville. Before that, briefly, Atlanta. A pattern of cities, none of them sticky enough to hold him. He had 2 social media accounts, one public and polished, full of studio photos and rooftop dinners and captioned moments, and one semi-private I found through a mutual connection that told a quieter story. The semi-private one had posts from an ex-girlfriend in Memphis who'd filed a civil harassment complaint 18 months ago, since withdrawn. It had a photo of a lease agreement for a Memphis apartment posted in frustration, apparently with a final notice of eviction stamped across the top. It had a comment thread, too long to read fully, where someone named Darlene wrote, "When Kyle gets his hooks into someone comfortable, he stays until the money runs out or something better walks in." That would have been enough on its own. But then I found the child support records. Public court records in Tennessee are searchable. Kyle Mercer had an open case in Shelby County, Memphis for unpaid child support. 14 months of missed payments. The case had been referred to the State Enforcement Division. The last notation on the file was a 6-week-old entry. Respondent's address unknown. Enforcement action pending. Address unknown, except it wasn't unknown. His address was 4417 Crestwood Drive, Nashville, Tennessee. My former home address. The address he was using on his car insurance, I'd later find out, and on a credit card application submitted 2 months after he moved in. He wasn't just staying at my house. He was using my address as a shield. I sat with that information for 3 days before I did anything with it. Not out of hesitation, out of timing. I'd learned in the Army that the worst time to act on intelligence is the moment you receive it. You wait. You let the picture finish developing. And the picture, when it developed, was very clear. I called a family law attorney named Patricia Sims. Small office over on Charlotte Avenue. A woman who'd been doing this for 31 years and had the particular economy of language that comes from having heard every possible variation of human foolishness. I told her everything. Kyle's background, the child support case, the address situation, Emma's comment about loud voices, the dog tags. She listened without moving her pen. Then she said, "Mr. Garrett, you're not here about revenge." I said, "No, ma'am, I'm here about my daughter." She leaned back slightly. "Good, because revenge cases are expensive and unpredictable. Child welfare cases are different. Courts pay attention to stability, documentation, pattern of behavior." She paused. "A man using a minor child's home address to evade a state child support enforcement order is not a stable domestic situation." "I know. Document the loud incidents," Emma's comment stated. "Any respiratory episodes, dates, and whether they could be linked to environmental factors like vaping, which you mentioned. The dog tags, if you can get them returned." I nodded. "And Mr. Garrett?" She looked at me directly. "Whatever happened between you and your ex-wife, the goal here is Emma. If you stay focused on that, courts tend to agree with you. If you drift toward the other thing," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Emma's school had a winter potluck dinner in November. One of those events where every family brings a dish and the kids perform something they've been practicing for 3 weeks. Emma was doing a little spoken poem about seasons. She'd practiced it with me every evening of the week she was at my place, holding her paper with both hands the way she did when something mattered to her. Sandra and I both showed up. We were civil. We'd gotten good at civil by that point. It was the kind of professional courtesy between two people who had shared a life and were now managing the logistics of a former life. Kyle came with Sandra. He wore a jacket that probably cost what I made in 3 days. He shook hands with the other fathers in that particular way men do when they're performing confidence, rather than having it the slightly too firm grip. The eye contact held a beat too long. He put his arm around Sandra's shoulders when other parents were watching. He laughed a little too readily at things that weren't that funny. I watched this from across the gymnasium and felt nothing in particular. By that point, I had enough documentation to begin a formal custody modification request. What Kyle did at a school potluck was not my concern. What happened next was not my plan. It just happened. Emma found me first, the way she always did, threading through legs and folding chairs to get to me. She hugged my leg and looked up at me and said, "Daddy, I practiced the poem so many times, I think it came out my ears." I crouched down. "Good. That means it's in your bones now." She considered that seriously. "Can poems be in bones?" "The good ones can." She smiled and ran off toward the stage area. I stood back up and turned to find Kyle standing about 3 feet away, holding a paper plate of something. He'd come over specifically. That was clear. He looked me up and down, once the same look as before, the appraising look, and he said, casually, to the space between us, "You know she's not going back to you, right? Just want to make sure that's clear." Man to man. "I know divorce guys get ideas." I said nothing. He smiled. "No offense, just reality. She's in a better place now, happier. You should focus on your own thing." I looked at him for a moment, then I said, "Kyle, Child Support Enforcement in Shelby County has you listed as residing at an unknown address." The smile didn't disappear. It froze. "Which is different. I don't know what you're—" 14 months. I said it quietly. "That's a long time to be unavailable." A parent walked past us. Kyle's jaw worked once. Then he said very quietly and very specifically, "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not," I said. And I walked away to find a seat. Emma's poem was about how autumn doesn't apologize for losing its leaves, because the tree knows what it's doing. I thought that was about right. The school Christmas concert was December 14th, 8 p.m. Emma was playing the triangle in the little percussion section and was extremely serious about this responsibility. I got there early and sat near the end of a middle row, close enough to see her face from the stage. I had my phone in my jacket pocket with the voice memo app already running, not because I expected anything to happen, but because Patricia Sims had told me to document everything, and documentation is a habit once you start. Sandra and Kyle arrived 20 minutes later. Kyle had been drinking. Not dramatically, not stumbling, just enough. I could tell from the way he was holding himself, a half-degree looser than usual, the way men get when they think looseness is confidence. Sandra sat 2 rows ahead and to my left. Kyle sat beside her, scrolling his phone. The concert started. 30 children in construction paper costumes, a keyboard player who was truly giving everything, a teacher conducting with the determination of someone leading troops into battle. Emma was in the back row of the percussion section, triangle raised. waiting for her moment with absolute focus. When her part came, she played it. Twice, both times precisely. I felt something in my chest that has no clean name. The program ran about 45 minutes. Toward the end, I noticed Kyle had gone outside. I noticed Sandra checking her phone repeatedly. I noticed her expression cycling through something private. When the concert ended and families began moving toward their children, I made my way toward the stage area. I was maybe 15 feet away from Emma when I heard raised voices from the side hallway, the one that led to the parking lot. Sandra's voice first. "You told me you'd handled it. You told me Memphis was done." Then Kyle's voice, not quite lowered enough. "It's complicated, Sandra. That whole situation is more complicated than I made it sound. There are court papers, Kyle, at my house, with my address on them. I didn't. You used my address, my children's address. Silence." Then Kyle's voice. "Harder now. Look, I don't need a lecture right now. I need you to trust me. Trust you." Sandra's voice had gone very flat. "I pulled Emma out of school for a week last month because she couldn't breathe. You told me it was the season. Her allergist said it was smoke exposure. In the house. I vape outside. I watched you vape in the kitchen." The hallway had gone very quiet in a specific way that meant other people had also stopped moving. Kyle apparently became aware of this. His voice dropped. "Can we not do this here?" "Where then?" "Because I've been trying to do it at home for 2 months, and you either leave or you change the subject." Emma found me right then, threading through the parents near the stage door, and she grabbed my hand with both of hers and looked up at me and whispered, "Daddy, they're arguing again." She could hear it too. Every child in a 15-foot radius could hear it. I picked her up. She wrapped her arms around my neck and put her face against my shoulder, and I could feel her breathing slightly faster than it should have been, slightly more work, cold air, stress, possible smoke exposure over the last weeks. All of it piling up in lungs that had never had the luxury of an easy breath. I held her and moved away from the hallway. Behind us, Kyle's voice rose once more loud enough now that the nearest parents turned. "You know what your problem is? You wanted a man who had it all figured out. Bobby had it all figured out and you were bored. So don't come at me about what I said I'd handled." "Do not," Sandra said, in a voice I recognized from a long time ago. "Say his name right now." "Why not?" "He's already won, Sandra. Look around. He's the good guy in every room. The solid, dependable, boring, exhausting good guy. And you want me to compete with that? I'm not built for that." A long silence. Then Sandra's voice, quietly. "I know." I didn't stay to hear the rest. I carried Emma outside into cold December air, and we sat on the trunk of my truck, and I held her, and she said, "Daddy, can we go see Christmas lights after this?" And I said, "Yeah, baby, that's exactly what we're going to do." Kyle was gone inside of 2 weeks. Not dramatically. According to Sandra, who called me on a Sunday evening, 6 days after the Christmas concert, voice flat and tired in a way that had nothing to do with performance, he left, while she was taking Emma to her Tuesday speech therapy appointment. 2 bags, his guitar, and the jacket that probably cost 3 days of my salary. He did not take the dog tags. They were on Emma's nightstand when Sandra checked. Emma said Kyle had given them back to her the week before. Said he'd been meaning to. Meaning to. I picked Emma up the following Friday. She ran to my truck the way she always did, full speed, and informed me that her friend Haley at school had gotten a hamster, and she wanted to know if hamsters were allowed in our rental house, and also she'd learned that triangle players are underappreciated in music history. I said both of those things sounded right. That evening I called Patricia Sims, and we discussed the modification request formally. Sandra, to her credit, did not contest it. She asked for Wednesday evenings and every other weekend. Patricia said that was more than reasonable, and we should take it. I want to be honest about what I felt in the days that followed. It wasn't satisfaction. Satisfaction implies you wanted something and got it, and the thing about watching someone you spent 28 years loving make choices that hurt your daughter is that there is no satisfaction in being right about how it ends. There's just the slow, quiet work of making sure the damage is contained. The dog tags went back into the box where they'd always lived, a green military box, top shelf of my closet, and I put Emma's favorite stuffed animal on top of the box, which was her idea. "For guarding," she said. "The rabbit guards the important stuff." I said that seemed like the right system. 6 months later, my rental house on Hillsborough Road no longer smelled like anyone else's cooking. It smelled like Emma's coconut shampoo in the bathroom, like the industrial-grade air purifier I'd set up in the living room that ran quietly all the time for her breathing. Like the coffee I made every morning at 6:30, 2 cups. Even though I only needed one, an old habit from 28 years of making enough for two. I stopped making 2 cups around March. It took me that long. Emma's respiratory incidence dropped significantly once she moved in full-time. Her allergist noted it at the spring appointment. I didn't say anything about why. I just wrote it in the documentation log I'd been keeping since November and closed the notebook. Sandra and I found something workable, eventually. Not warm, not the way things were, but workable, which is its own kind of grace after everything. I coached Emma's spring t-ball team at the park on Sundays. 6-year-olds trying to hit a ball off a rubber post while their parents screamed encouragement and occasionally screamed at each other. Emma was third in the batting order and completely unbothered by this assignment. One Saturday after practice, we sat in my truck in the parking lot eating popsicles from the snack stand, and Emma held up her dog tags. She wore them sometimes now. On Saturdays, her choice, and she said, "Daddy, what do these say?" I read her the information on them: name, branch, blood type, the small facts of a man's service record. She held them in her palm for a moment, looking at them. Then she said, "Can I keep them when I grow up?" I had to look out the windshield for a second. At the empty t-ball field, at the last of the Saturday afternoon light going sideways through the Tennessee trees. "Yeah, baby," I said, "those are yours." She put them back around her neck and finished her popsicle. I thought about what the attorney had said. Courts pay attention to patterns. A man who shows up consistently, without drama, that's a pattern too. I thought about what Marcus had said. Sometimes you don't have to look. Things surface on their own when a man is patient. I thought about a yellow dress and a barbecue and a 22-year-old woman who laughed with her whole face, and how 28 years takes the same shape as everything else. When you're far enough away from it, it just looks like time. And I thought about Emma, asleep in the back seat on the way home, breathing easily in the cold, clean air, dog tags rising and falling against her chest. I didn't win anything. I just stopped losing ground. And someday, when she's older, I think she'll understand the difference. If you've ever sat in a parking lot at midnight wondering how your life turned into something unrecognizable, if you've ever been the person in the room who fixed everything and still ended up with nothing, then you already know this story isn't really about divorce. It's about whether the quiet ones finish last. They don't. Tell me in the comments, what's the one moment that showed you exactly who someone really was? The one moment where the mask finally came off? I'll read every single one.